Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
How are companies, how are banks, how are consumers positioning ahead of what may be a pretty volatile second term for Donald Trump? We've got the perfect guest to talk about just that. Tobias Meyer, DHL Group's CEO, is in London just to see us, I'm told. Joins us around the table. Tobias, a pleasure to have you on the program. Walk us through kind of this positioning story around Donald Trump. What are you hearing? Are people worried? Are you seeing that show up in the likes of some of the flows?
Well, definitely. I mean, it's a big topic. I was in South America just 2 weeks ago for an entire week, in Mexico, in Brazil, in Colombia as well. And especially the Mexican economy being so closely tied to the U.S., it's a big topic what will happen. Also amongst our customers, we have supply chains there being closely integrated, a lot of parts coming from Mexico into plants in the U.S. as well. Yep. So there's concern around that. But also on, I think, the Pacific, the China-U.S. trade being quite a strong element of that being B2C as well. So it's discussion about de minimis again. The transatlantic being more about industrials like automotive.
Is there any evidence that people are front-running the tariffs? Are you seeing any stock build coming through, maybe in the States?
Hard to say, but there's good volume in the last weeks. We see that in ocean freight, we see that in air freight. The year has been quite volatile. We had very strong exports out of China for many weeks, on the ocean freight side especially, so strong growth there. But it has been volatile, so it's hard to call out whether there's really a strong element of that now.
Good.
But you mentioned the South American aspect as well. Part of the Trump trade has been an expectation or a ramp up of this friendshoring dynamic. Is there evidence of that? It felt like in the first Trump administration that was kind of put on pause. Could you see that restart?
Well, definitely as it relates to Mexico, I do think we see, for a variety of reasons, that this diversification of the supply chain that has been talked about, which for Mexico and the U.S. means also some nearshoring. I think for the rest of the world, this is quite different. We see more things shifting to Southeast Asia, but we've also seen customers putting production back into China, recognizing that this is the market where the supply chain is the deepest, the capacity is the largest. And many people still think that the next thing after China is China when it comes to manufacturing.
I mean, you're based in Europe. When we're talking about trade under Donald Trump, how do you think that Europe's going to retaliate? I was going to say negotiate. What are you planning for?
Well, that's a good question. I think 2025 is a year where the scenarios are unusually wide apart. You could definitely see a good scenario where indications out of the U.S., continued investments along with IRA, for instance, some tax reliefs, elections in Europe that lead to stable governments, that could influence confidence quite positively. But on the other hand, there is the scenario where support to Ukraine might not continue, that then weighing on confidence in Europe, and tariffs coming into play. The European automotive industry is already in quite a weak position. So seeing tariffs on top of that would make people quite nervous. So the range of scenarios is quite wide.
There's a hard question I want to ask you. I mean, it's about the sad news of that plane crash, the DHL cargo plane crash near the Lithuanian capital. I know that a crew member died, 3 others were injured. I really wonder whether it's responsible to be using planes that first entered service in 1993. That's older than Kriti.
Well, honestly, I don't think that is a problem. Our thoughts are with the family of the deceased pilot and the crew members that are still in hospital. But operating such aircraft safely is something that the industry has learned over many years. I'm an aviation engineer myself, and I find it close to a miracle, the safety standards that we have achieved in aviation. If you compare this, particularly what we see in terms of road transport, if you look at markets like India, where we now have a 6-digit number of dead people on the road. So it is a very tragic event. And
you're not worried about the safety of the fleet?
No, I'm not worried about the safety of the fleet. The aviation industry has, over many decades, continued to lift the standards, address new challenges of different kinds, taken the right conclusion also from technical failures that we've seen in the past. So I think this industry really has a very good track record as it relates to safety.
You getting the aircraft you want out of Seattle? I think of you as an airline in a way, and when I talk to the airline bosses that I often talk to, they tell me they're not getting the airplanes they need out of Seattle. Is that a problem for you as well?
So yes, we still have some 777 aircrafts, freighters. We use new from-the-line aircrafts, particularly on the intercontinental lanes, also because of sustainability reasons. We want to have the most efficient asset to burn as little fuel as possible for the cargo that we transport. So that's very important to us. And we have initiated a new build program several years ago, and we're still waiting for some aircraft. And we do see that the lack of deliveries is causing issues.
So one of the issues that Ben Smith at Air France was flagging, that his maintenance costs are significantly higher. Are you having that same issue?
Well, we all need to still fly all the aircraft also on intercontinental routes. That's not good for fuel burn, and that's not good for maintenance as well.
So you're in terms of the margin, is that a margin impact?
I think for us, look, we operate a fleet of roughly 300 units, so we're lacking a single-digit number, so I can't see that as a huge driver, but it's definitely more than an annoyance. More than an annoyance. Okay.
Well, I feel like that's the perfect segue almost to maybe something a little bit closer to home, and that is the German election coming up in February, Tobias. I'm not going to ask you what you think of the politics, but I am curious how it affects your business, and especially when things like corporate taxation is something that could very fundamentally change the bottom line of your company.
Well, I mean, we are now predominantly an international company. The great majority of our revenue is outside Germany. It still affects us. We are the universal service provider as it relates to the postal system, so we'll help with the ballots, with the mail elections. That's a big topic for us, that we're well set up to do that in February when voters hit for the polls in Germany. I think what is very important for Europe is to see a stable government, that we get out of this situation that is not only now the case in Germany, but we see this in France, we see this in the Netherlands, for instance, in Belgium, that we get into a setting again where we have solid governments with strong majorities or good majorities in their parliaments, and that we see politics moving forward.
Are you suffering from, just in terms of one of the factors that politics is interacting with at the moment is immigration and labour shortages, and is that something that you're experiencing right now? What kind of wage growth are you seeing? Are you seeing shortages of available labour? We're coming up to the holiday seasons. Is that an issue?
No, it has been much less of an issue this year, and that's a good sign for us, but not a good sign for the economy. So I do think there is some weakening, and we find it easier than in previous years to get labor for the peak season, be that in Germany, be that across Europe. I think structurally, Germany has changed some things in terms of legislation to enable more regular immigration based on merits. So we think that this is a good thing, but it still needs to filter through. There's a lot of bureaucracy around that as well. Bureaucracy being a big topic in Germany and Europe anyway.
Do you think there's too much bureaucracy in Germany? Like, I'm sure you're going to say the answer is yes, but how big a problem is it? Just to put, you deal with it at the coalface every day.
Yeah, and every piece of it is bearable. There's no doubt of it. If you take a single law and say, why can a large company not do that? That's a good argument. But if you look at the breadth that what we have built up over the last 20 years, it's like a little stone put in your backpack every day. And if you do that for a long time, it just gets very heavy.
Tobias, I'm going to put you on the spot. 20 seconds if you can. DHL prides itself on being the first in a certain conflict zone and perhaps the last to leave. Are you positioning around the resolutions in the Middle East?
Well, we operate in different countries around the world. We operate across also geopolitical borders, and we'll continue to do that. We need to work with local governments to enable that. So that's what we continue to do. We're going to be present in those markets. Yeah. We stick by the policy that you mentioned. We want to be the first in, last out, to support our customers, to support these economies, to continue to participate in the benefits of global trade. Yeah. So that's what we've tried to do.
All right. You heard it here. DHL Group CEO Tobias Meyer joining us around the table. This is Bloomberg.